Welcome to Wisdom for Life, where we sift through philosophy to find practical advice that you can use in your everyday life. Hi, I'm Dan Hayes, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Greg Sadler. And today we're doing a special episode, 1 year in.
Yep, we have been on the air for a little over a year at this point, and so we thought we'd do kind of a retrospective episode and talk about what the show's origin was and how we got it started and some of the things we learned along the way. And I think we'll probably talk about a whole bunch of other things and go off on tangents as we so often do, right?
Hey, I love tangents. They're a fundamental component of calculus and a rather fun portion of conversation.
Yeah, the only thing we have to avoid is like going down too many rabbit holes because those take up so much time on the air, right?
Mm-hmm. But the good thing about them is sometimes you can stumble into new ideas or thoughts you've never thought before.
That's true. And oftentimes they turn into whole episodes of their own for us, right?
Yeah, it's like, oh, that's really interesting. We should hold that for something later.
So what were some of the things that you'd wanted to talk about in this episode? I should mention, too, before we get started. So we have managed during a time of COVID-19 to get 31 episodes in, which I think is quite an achievement for two guys who are pretty busy, right? And got busier as things went on. So I just wanted to say that very quickly. But what are some of the things that you wanted to talk about in particular?
Just like some of the trials and tribulations and the, I don't know, kind of like the successes and how we've grown, I think are the biggest things to talk about.
Is it too early for us to start talking about this as glory days? Do we have to have the equivalence of being out of high school for 5 years or so?
I don't know. I feel like we couldn't even start to call it glory years.
Yeah. Well, we don't have years.
I don't think we're deep enough into it.
Exactly. Yeah, we don't have enough laurels to really rest on. We can, maybe just to sit on for a little bit, right?
Yeah. You know what? I really feel like I should get some laurels, just wear them around.
Yeah, but those are just for show though, not for resting on.
Yeah. Yeah, they're usually grape leaves, and there's that's not going to support you.
Yeah. Well, maybe make a mesh or something, right?
Yeah. A woven.
I'm not, it's kind of funny. I don't know what the origin of that rest on your laurels actually is. It couldn't have any sort of physical component to it, right?
No. So it's, I actually know this one. So laurels are given for, especially during ancient Greek times as a trophy for winning some athletic event.
Okay.
And so you'd wear the laurels, and you would, basically if you got those, you could go into any restaurant and you could, or some place to eat, and people would buy you your food or your drink and whatnot. So it's basically the idea that you're resting on your old accomplishments without actually doing anything. So you're just I've got this reputation, I did all these things. Now I can just kind of sit around and go soak it in without actually having to do anything more.
So was there an expiration date that was based on the laurel leaves not drying out or anything? You could only make this work for you for a certain amount of time?
They're super ephemeral. It's not like they could dip them in plastic back then.
Yeah.
So it was an ephemeral thing. I don't know. I kind of love that was at least part of the winnings is something that was ephemeral, that would deteriorate over time, that it wasn't so staying as the Olympic medals that we have nowadays.
Oh yeah, interesting. Yeah, I suppose once you have a medal, right, you put it on your shelf and you've got it for the next 40, 50 years. So yeah, we could say that about all sorts of others. But let's jump into talking about the show. So one of the things that we were going to talk about right off the bat was things that we've learned through doing this radio show that started back in March of 2020, shortly before the COVID crisis hit, right?
2 weeks.
Yeah. So what did you learn? What was one of the things you learned?
So part of the process was the technical side, and so we had to go through sit through a class and learn all the technical bits as well as like all the legal bits, so like what you can and can't say and whatnot. So there's specifically the technical bits of running the audio equipment at the radio station, and then once we had to move away from that, setting this up so we could continue to do that from a distance away, and then also then taking this radio show that we had been creating and making it into a podcast is distributed, were the big technical problems that we had to overcome. And then, unless you have something.
Well, I was just going to say, with respect to that, the words you're not allowed to say on the radio, I think we've only had to bleep out something once the entire year that we've been on the air. Mm-hmm. Does that sound about right, or was it maybe twice? I mean, it's been a very minuscule amount, right? It's not like we have a button that we have to push all the time or anything like that.
Yeah, we've been rather good in that, especially we had a couple, 2 months ago, we had the Am I the...
Oh, right. Right. Am I the jerk? Right.
Am I the jerk episode. And I was like, okay, I can't say that last A there.
We had to skirt around that quite a bit, didn't we? Yeah.
But otherwise, it's pretty good. And because now that we record this beforehand instead of being live like we were originally, it does give us that leeway that we can, even though we're really good about it, to be able to edit it before it goes to air.
The trick, though, and so later on we're gonna do like a behind the scenes or pulling back the curtain. But the trick with that sort of thing, just to give you a little preview, is as soon as we say something that we're not supposed to say, we have to note the time immediately, because we can't stop recording. We have to keep on with what we're doing, and so you have to almost have two things going on at the same time in your head, noting exactly when it is so that you can edit it out later on, and continuing on with your train of thought. And I suppose there's a third thing too, like not allowing it to derail you, not getting embarrassed about it or anything like that. Not saying yet another word, another expletive. Right? So yeah. Right. I think the thing that I learned is it's actually in some respects it's easier to walk into the studio and sit down, even with all the technology that we have to handle and the fact that we're under the gun to get it done right then. It's a little bit easier to get that done for me, because time management is always something I struggle with. And so, like we're recording this kind of late at night, which we really need to do in part because I live downtown and it's a little bit quieter. Riverwest is probably a bit quieter at night, I imagine, as well. And, making sure that we actually get underway, get all of the, not just recording, but the editing done so that the show can air at the proper time. That takes a little bit more finagling than just walking in, seating our butts in the stools and going at it.
Yeah.
Did you have a similar experience in that respect or not?
Yeah, especially because at the time when we originally started this, I did not have a regular job that had a regular schedule in it. So it's really nice to have something that is very concrete in the course of the week, that like we're going to go there, do that,
Yeah.
Another thing that I had was how to make a little bit better audio to make sure that your diction and enunciation are well as reducing the ums. Those
are killers. I often say right at the end of things.
Right.
All those pauses. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, you can't concentrate on that all the time, right? Because you can't have your brain totally occupied with that. It is tough not to shift into those, especially when you're thinking about something.
Mm-hmm. And you're not always incredibly conscious of them, especially when you're first starting to do this, because they're part of normal speech, and radio is not exactly normal speech patterns.
That's right. Yeah. Becoming incredibly conscious, though, does happen as soon as you start editing it. You become
Yes.
hyper conscious of how often, not just saying or filler words like that. I will say the same word twice, and I had no idea that I was doing that so often. Doing podcast stuff also reveals that to you as well.
Yeah, I think repeating the word is a lot better than the ums. The other thing is that you become incredibly well versed in finding the waveform of ums if you're editing them out.
That's true. Yeah, should we jump ahead to talking about that, or should we tell the backstory? Well, let's do the backstory first, right?
Yeah.
Rather than getting into all these technical weeds right off the start.
Right.
So, how did Wisdom for Life come to being? There's a long backstory, both for me and for Dan, and then for both of us together. On my part, my wife and I came back to Milwaukee in 2015, and shortly after that, we actually pitched the idea of a philosophy-related show to Riverwest Radio, but they said, "Oh, we've got enough shows right now, but would you be interested in doing some consulting work for us?" And we did it pro bono because, we'll talk about Riverwest Radio always needs donations in a bit, and so that's an in-kind donation. And I ended up coming on as a guest on 2 different shows, one about cuisine and then one that's a little bit harder to describe that the Scrouse used to do. We talked about like H.P. Lovecraft and Philip Dick, but we ranged over a lot of other topics as well. So that's how I got into that Riverwest Radio matrix. And then every once in a while, I'd run into Martin at a coffee shop, and he'd say, "Hey, do you think you want to do a show sometime?" And it just the wheels never aligned properly, right? That only happens when you come into the story. So, I mean, you've got a longer back history with Riverwest Radio. Why don't you say a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I've lived in Riverwest off and on for the last over a decade now, and I saw the rise of Riverwest Radio. I remember early on, like Zav, one of the runners of it, with Martin, had like a teepee that he set up outside, so it kind of like gives you kind of the feel of the neighborhood that is kind of like bohemian and a little bit odd in just the right ways. And once I came back after college and after a stint out in California, I had at that point in time I had already started to get kind of deep into Stoic philosophy, and that's how I eventually met up with Greg at the Milwaukee Stoic Fellowship, which he was running. And I remember coming in, and I was so new that like I walked in the doors like, "Is this the Cynics? This is Stoics." I'm like, "Oh yes, that's the one."
I forgot about that. Yeah. Yeah, we founded this Stoic Fellowship, which is a branch of a much larger worldwide set of organizations, right? And what we do is we get together, and it used to be just once a month, but Dan expanded it considerably with these Stoic walk and talks. You got that idea from one of the Bay Area.
The Fremont Stoics.
Okay, right, yeah. And so at first that was going to, which park was it?
Mostly Lake Park.
That's right, yeah. And walking around and talking about Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus and chatting for a while. And so then, inclement weather turned it into a coffee house kind of thing. And then COVID forced it into Zoom sessions, just like our regular meetup. And so Dan and I got to know each other quite well through going to these Stoic fellowships. At one point, we were actually talking about doing like a summer camp thing, which, COVID would have, thank God we didn't start planning that because COVID would have really put the kibosh on that. But I remember sitting in I think it was in my car, and we started talking about doing a show, right? Mm-hmm. So it was
we were kind of like spitballing ideas of like, is there a project to do? And one of them was the radio show. I was just like, oh yeah, that seems right. Hey, look, there's a radio station that is ripe for us to go and be a part of. And it kind of built out from there. I guess we looked online to see like what was the process to actually sign up and become part of the group.
And that's a cool feature of Riverwest Radio that we'll talk about in just a bit. It is definitely community radio, so they're open to all sorts of show ideas. Obviously, there's some that they'll say, we've got enough of those, like sports shows or I think music shows. But when it comes to putting philosophy online out there in the internet, there's kind of a lack of that, and especially with practical philosophy. I mean, there are philosophy shows where it's kind of academic-y and, what does Hume have to say about causality? Do we really know anything, about cause and effect for sure? That's got some practical effects, but it's pretty abstract, right? The sort of stuff that we're engaging
A little bit
with.
head in the clouds there.
Yeah. So the stuff that we're providing, it was to be things that could reach ordinary people, right?
And be beneficial. And
That's right. Yeah.
And useful specifically.
Yeah. So we started getting together, and I think we talked about it for at least a couple months before we actually, we were taking steps. Right? We were doing research, but before we actually contacted Martin and Zav, you and I had kicked around some ideas at coffee houses mostly. Where else?
Downtown at the Pfister Hotel?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that was fun. I didn't realize, I live right downtown, and I didn't realize that these older hotels have all sorts of, what would you call them? Auxiliary things, basically.
Amenities.
Yeah, exactly. For the people who are there, but they're anyone could walk in and make use of them. Like there was that nice cafe that we went to, and then you showed me it wasn't quite a museum, but it was a display thing.
Well, oh yes, because they have they have an artist in residence always.
That's right, yeah.
And they have a place where they work, which is also has plate glass windows, so you can see the work they're working on. So sometimes it's sculptors, sometimes it's what are they? Seamstress seems less than what I mean, but like an artist that creates clothes.
Textiles, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I think someday we should actually, once COVID is done, we should actually do a show about all the cool things that you can access for free in Milwaukee. And you might feel a little bit like when you're walking in, like, I'm not sure if I belong here, but they won't kick you out. Where you can kind of have an interesting time, because that was a good example of that. Mm-hmm. And then we signed up, and as Dan was saying a little bit earlier, we had to do some training. We had to do 2 weekend workshops where we learned how to work the board and all the ins and outs of microphones and headphones and a lot of other administrivia kind of stuff, right? How to make a show work. And then there was all the content related things about what not to say, what to say, how to be appealing maybe is, what do you
How to
remember?
not go over time, especially when you're live.
Yeah. How not to get to the point where they'll cut you off.
I think that was it the first or the second episode, Zav comes running out from the back and goes like.
I think it was the first one.
Yeah.
I think it was our first episode. I've totally forgotten about that. Yeah.
It's like there's 30 seconds before the end of the hour. You must end.
Yeah. And they told us in the workshops that they were going to do that, and we somehow it escaped our mind or something like that. So then, the only other thing that we really had to do was we needed some show music for the intro and the outro. And I got a friend and colleague of mine, Scott Trulli, who I also do a metal show with. He's a great guitarist, and I asked him, would you do a clip for us? And he didn't even say how much do you want to pay me or anything like that. He was like, no, that'll be cool. I'll do it for you. And then he's like, what kind of stuff do you want? And I said, I don't know, kind of Joe Satriani-esque. And that's what we got. I mean, you heard it at the top of the hour, and you'll hear it as well.
And you'll hear it at the end as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and we actually use that as like our bracket for when we're doing things live, right? It fades in, it fades out at the top and the bottom of the hour, but we also use that for framing things in the way that we're doing things now.
Yeah. So if we're doing it live and we need to cut out the audio, we always have a backer track that we can bring up. And so if usually you haven't heard that in a very long time, but if there's any point in time where like we need to talk amongst ourselves, we'll just bring up the music and it's always behind us, just so you don't hear it.
Yeah, and with Riverwest Radio, because it is in Riverwest, and as Dan was mentioning, it's a really unique kind of neighborhood. In the old radio station, you could have people walking in off the street and wanting to contribute to your show, whether they were, whether it was planned or not. So that might be a case where you'd jack down the mics and boost up the music for a little bit and give people a little preview of, I don't know, some other tracks, right?
Right. And so if you want, please go check out Scott. We've always got our link in the show notes.
We should put a pitch right now, too. I know
Radio?
Exactly, yeah.
Yes.
And so let's talk briefly before we hit people up for making contributions about why Riverwest Radio is so important, right? Give them some value before we extract some value.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
I guess what is our focus? What is the idea behind the show? Why is it so important, and what are we going to be doing with it?
Well, so Wisdom for Life, it took us a while to pick out that name, but we wanted something that embodied the fact that we're focusing on life, we're focusing on practical things, and that we're bringing philosophy to bear. And it's not just philosophizing for the sake of philosophizing, but in order to live better, so to improve our relationships or develop a better understanding of who we are and how to, improve ourselves, all of those sorts of things.
But Greg, I thought navel gazing was this chief idea behind philosophy, isn't it?
Well, when I was younger, I could navel gaze a lot easier, but now I'm older and fatter, and it takes a little bit of work to do that. No. I mean, I think there are a lot of people who get into philosophy, and they're looking for something like what you're calling navel gazing. They're using it in kind of a narcissistic way to really focus on themselves, where they're the main object and everybody else should listen to them or think about what they have to say. But that's really boring stuff. I mean, I've had people like that in seminars, and after a while you're like, oh man, just sit down and shut up. Sooner or later people want something that's going to speak to them and has something, something they can use to maybe fix parts of their life or improve parts that are going well, or just understand themselves a little bit better, right?
Yeah.
I mean, actually, this is kind of a good jumping off point. So the Fremont Stoics, you and I have talked about this a bit. What was it that drew you to hanging out with those people? They probably weren't all professional academic philosophers, right? But they were very interested in Stoicism, and I imagine other schools of philosophy as well. What were they doing?
I guess I went to them because they were the close. I was living in Oakland at the moment, and so they were the closest group that met regularly. There was one up in Marin and then one in San Francisco, but they were meeting once a month. But these guys they were meeting every week, and so
okay,
that scratched my itch, and that's why I went there. And then also we walked around Lake Elizabeth in Fremont, which is a beautiful park and lake. Can't be unhappy with that situation. They're mostly interested in Stoicism. But I guess I took that because I was there, and once I came back, I wanted to reproduce that a little bit.
There must have been something that they were providing in their conversations that made you want to come back. Not just the beautiful lake, but something about the way they were doing things, I imagine. Right?
There's obviously community, and the ability to create those meaningful discussions in order to actually get deeper into a topic, and we can read all these things, and we're still kind of stuck on our heads, and unless we have something to bounce some ideas off of and try to, like, I think this is moral, and that kind of like fits into a certain moral worldview, and it's always good to have someone there to call you on your BS.
But call you in the right way, right? Not just to be a nitpicker or to be a professional critic or something like that, or even to be like, I'm gonna be your physical trainer. I'm gonna just punch you a lot and you'll get tougher that way, right? But somebody who they don't have to care about you, like you're the friend who's the one soul and two bodies sort of stuff, right? But they actually like treat you as a person and regard you as being important. That's something that I think a lot of people are missing in their lives. I get people who say, I want to study philosophy. I'm stuck doing it on my own because there's nobody else that I can really talk to about this sort of stuff. And so groups like that I think are pretty important. Or if you're inclined towards that sort of thing, having friends that you can engage with is often very valuable as well. Go ahead.
Goes into like building practices. Like you're doing this thing, you're talking about these things, and the end result is that you're like starting to instill in yourself better practices that lead you to a little bit more calmer state of mind, the ability to look at things in a more nuanced and broad way, to not be overwhelmed by certain things. And these were all benefits that we have brought into the show to a certain extent, of talking about what are the benefits for your mental state as well as your social state through philosophy.
Yeah. There were some other things that we'd wanted to talk about, like with the general idea of the show. And I think that some of these actually came out of what we did rather than like being things that we originally settled on. So one of the things I identified was veering off into current issues. So we ended up, for example, talking about protests and policing and the social contract and Black Lives Matter and things along those lines. Because we felt that it was important. And then, we've also been going to topics that are of, you might say, evergreen or perennial interest as well. And I think originally we had in mind, we're going to talk about the latter more, right? Mm-hmm. We're going to try to make sure that every episode is something that could be played 10 years from now. But I think we actually got a lot out of talking about what was happening in the world and in Milwaukee.
I would agree that, even though that it's going to be at least topical, that was just like the steed of the conversation. Yeah. And then the rest of the conversation is still an evergreen topic, that these issues are constant and and change over time, but like it's just the current incarnation of them.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There was another thing that you had in here that I thought was kind of cool. The familiarity of friends enjoying each other's company. So that's us, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I've heard a number of times people have responded in comments. It's like, it's really nice. It seems like you are just two old friends having a really good conversation with each other.
Yeah, rather than like radio hosts who like walk in, nod at each other, and then put on their shtick, right?
Right.
So here's an interesting question for you. Do you think that's been aided by the fact that we haven't been in the studio and we've had to do all this technical finagling? Because when we'd go into the studio, we'd chit chat before that, right? And we'd do that afterwards. But here we never start recording at the given point in time that we're coming on. We always chat for about half an hour or so and catch up. And
I don't know. I feel like there wasn't enough data points to actually make a distinction. Like there were literally 2 episodes that we did in the radio show before COVID lockdown happened.
Yeah.
But at least one of those, we preceded it by going to the coffee shop next door. We had a good time having some coffee and went over our notes for what we were expecting to go over in the episode. And I don't know, like we don't have the other example to compare it to, so I don't know if it has or has not.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see when we inevitably get to go back to the station, whenever that's going to be. So,
we should. Safe enough.
Oh, go ahead.
I said only when safe enough. That's it.
Yeah. So let's talk about Riverwest Radio. They're the ones who are hosting this. They gave us a home for this show. They are a community radio station, and that's something kind of unique. There's not a lot of those out there. And a lot of people mix up community and public radio, so I think we should talk about the differences between those. Everybody's familiar with, whatever their state public radio is or NPR, National Public Radio. We're kind of fortunate here in Wisconsin in that we've got quite a few, and they perform a really valuable role. They have cool shows, and sometimes they can be very local, but they're not as local as community radio, right?
No. Yeah, the community radio program was it early 2000s, I want to say it was kind of put into place, and it allowed a lot of people access to actually broadcasting that wouldn't be able to do that. And so almost all of them were only given permits for low power, and so they're a much lower radius in which they can operate on the FM dial. But Riverwest Radio, in the age of technology that you are, you can ask your Alexa or Google Home to do whatever. Just like ask them for Riverwest Radio, and it'll pop right up anywhere in the world, as well as going to their website.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting thing. So when it was originally put in place, I don't think people had in mind that it would be streaming over the internet, right?
Right.
So they were kind of like, well, we'll let them have this little tiny scrap.
Right.
Now, community radio can be as big as any of the commercial affiliates if enough people listen to it.
Right. And it opened up the opportunity for people that would usually never have the ability or the access to run their own radio station to just take the reins and go and do crazy new things.
Yeah, so Zav and Martin, the people who run Riverwest Radio, I don't want to say that they have less work to do, because they actually have a lot more work to do in many respects, but they're doing a very different kind of work than station managers would be doing for, NPR or a commercial radio station, in that they, that proverbial herding cats. I think that they're doing a lot of that. And they're not doing it because they've got all these divas or, big performers who are coming on, but rather because it is community radio. So shows are entrusted to people to produce, not just to be hosts of, but to plan out, to carry out all the production. And there's kind of a big, what would you call it? There's a big promise and trust that's going on every time that somebody comes on the air, that you're not going to say stuff that the FCC is going to have a problem with, and you're going to produce good content that people will be interested in. If you're going to do a show that requires research, you're going to have done it. And I think they've been pretty, pleasantly, I don't know if they're surprised or not, but the shows are good. There's a lot of really great content on Riverwest Radio.
Yeah, and most of the people are doing this basically for free, so there's not this monetary motivation to do this. This is kind of like a labor of love, that people love their radio station, and the opportunity to have their voice be projected is enough to get them to go. But because there isn't some it's a job, it is a little bit of herding cats, as you said.
Yeah, they put in a lot of work, those guys, and so do show producers. Each show, like we come up with a script, kind of. I mean, it's not much of a script. It's a bunch of bullet points, right? But some of the shows, really go into a lot of work, and they use all the sound effects and things like that. And nobody's actually making anything off of that. It's all a service for the Riverwest community, the Milwaukee community, and the larger world community. So, yeah. So we should make an appeal at this point in time, now that we've talked up Riverwest Radio and community radio. Do you want to do it, Dan, or you want me to do it?
Oh, I think we could both do it. Riverwest Radio, WXRW, 104.1 LPFM in Milwaukee.
It's a good thing you've got that memorized, because I don't.
Is community radio and produces our show, as well as a plethora of other music, news, and politics radio shows for the community of Riverwest and for the world.
Yeah, they're really doing a lot of great work, and it's very easy to donate. There's a donate button on the website that we're putting a link to in here.
Riverwestradio.com.
Exactly. So, if you chip in just $5, $10, whatever you think is adequate, you're actually helping to provide a basis for episode after episode after episode of great shows, and keeping something that's really unique here in Milwaukee running and producing.
Yeah, it's a great resource, and I hope that you enjoyed us enough that you might help the people that help us bring it to you.
Yeah, that's a good pitch, I think. So let's talk a little bit of history. We've mentioned this a couple times. We got 2 episodes in, and then COVID hit. And there is a kind of story that we've told before, but I think a lot of listeners might not know about how our show was the very last show that went live in the studio.
Right. So we did our first show. Everything was copacetic, and all of it, the rumblings of foreboding things to come. And some places are shutting down, but there's no overall shutting down. And it comes to, I think we're at Friday at 4
to 5, I think we did. Yeah.
That was a great spot.
Yeah. That was ideal. Yeah.
How the heck did we luck into that? I don't know. But we go to the door, and was it locked when we got there?
No. We got in, and then they locked the door behind us. And I thought, that's weird.
Yeah. And we're getting up there to set up. And they're like, what, didn't you get the email?
No, that came after.
Oh, okay.
We did the whole show. They looked at us weird, and maybe looked back at them weird, but it was our second show, so we're like, well, maybe they're not used to us being in here, or and so we sat down and we did our show, and then I think it was Zav came up to us afterwards. He said, the station's closed, right?
And we're like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, and apparently they had sent out a mass email to all of their show producers, but there was a snafu, and our emails were not put on that list.
Because we were so new. That's
right.
What it was. Yeah. And so they were wondering what the hell we were doing walking in there, but they were cool with it. They rolled with it and let us do that second episode, which was about handling fear in a pandemic, right?
Right.
So maybe they thought we were doing a public service or something.
Well, it was a public service. Of course it was.
Yeah.
But
we should listen to that one and see what our advice was back then.
Yeah, a year into it and figure it out.
So anyway, they said, well, we're closing down now. We're not sure what we're going to do. And the kicker was, it's just too difficult to disinfect everything that's involved in radio. You got the mics, and you'd have to swap out mic covers for every single show. But the biggest killer is the board.
There's
soundboard.
Over 100 little switches on the board.
Yeah, there's no way you could disinfect that. So So, it was a while before. How long was it before we figured out that we could do this? A couple months?
No, I think it was less than that. I think it was a month at most.
Okay. I know that they did some shows by having people call in.
Right.
And then now they're using Zoom themselves, right, for other shows?
Yes. So they're doing it live that way.
Yeah.
But I think we've really enjoyed the ability to record whenever and not be under that exact timeline.
We figured out an MO that works really good for us and creates the sort of things that we want and gives us enough control over the quality. So I've got this section, peeling back the curtain, where I thought we would tell them about how we actually do this.
Yeah, okay. So we have a 59-minute hard limit because this is first and foremost a radio show, and it has to fit into the FCC dictated constraints. There has to be 1 minute of station identification every hour, and so we must fit into a time limit that is dictated by the format or the medium of a radio show.
So right now we each have a stopwatch on our computers, and we're watching that. Sometimes we get pretty close to the limit, but most times we manage to pull it off.
Yeah, and then we, at least back in the times when we were in it, we had the board. We had to bring out the intro, bring down all the levels, bring up the things. But now it's we go over our notes. We clap our hands so we can synchronize the audio once we go into the editing, and we
Dan does his countdown.
So you go 3. If you can see us on YouTube, 3, 2, and then go, and we start the show. And we click our timer at that point in time, so we know exactly where we are in the show, and we try to follow our script as best as we can.
Yeah, which is usually not all that well. we often have more content than we get to. But we're actually right now, each of us is recording on our end using this free software called Audacity, which works pretty well, and we use it for editing. And we're looking at each other using Zoom. So Zoom is recording the video and its own audio track, but we're not using the audio track from Zoom because it's not good enough. We want it to be as close to studio quality as possible. So Audacity affords that to us. And then we take Dan's track, we take my track, we beef them up a little bit, try to improve the audio as much as possible, and then edit them together into one big master track, and then put the show music at the beginning and end. And then we have a podcast episode which goes to Martin and Zav at the station, and it plays at our designated hour. So there's actually a lot involved in there's more, I would say, involved in the producing of the show now on our end than there was when we could do it in studio, right?
And then we also then put it to other places. We actually make a podcast.
Right.
So I run the podcast distribution side of it, and so I throw it up to our feed and send it out to all of you people. And then Greg makes a YouTube video out of it.
Yeah, and I'll tell you a little trick too. Sometimes the Zoom and the audio track, they don't match up exactly. And so I got to do a little bit of cutting here and there and stretching things out to make it fit. So if you're ever watching it and it doesn't look exactly like the words are mapped onto our mouths perfectly, well, we're
aliens. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah. Peel back the reptilian masks. No, it's just these things don't sync perfectly, and it's one of the challenges of these technological platforms. It's really good when we give you the impression that everything is going off totally without a hitch, but trust me, nothing's ever happening that way behind the scenes. Yeah.
But the end product is pretty dang good, if I say so myself. And hey, You're here.
That's a perfect segue into favorite episodes. If you know, which do you think were particularly good or fun, or however else you want to, whatever else what goes into making it your favorite?
So I think the Circles of Connection and Care was one of the first episodes where I was like, I felt like it was one of the first that we hit our stride. That was one of the first I was like, I was really happy about that, and that was the one early on that I would say, hey, I do have this radio show. If you're interested, I suggest you listen to this episode first. That one was our, I think, early high watermark.
That's a good criterion. That could be something like on a quiz. Like if you had to pick one episode to recommend a show, you know, that's actually a great way to look at it.
Was one of yours?
Well, I really liked the Future of Work one that we did, where we were talking about, I mean, something that is going to happen. I mean, we live in this, they now talk about the precariat, you know, people who are stuck working gig jobs or moving from one job to the next. And that's more and more becoming the way work gets divvied out to us. And then we've got all the developments with AI and robotics and logistics. And, you know, we could be looking at a point in time not that far from now where a lot of the things that we think of as jobs have been phased out, you know, or assigned to someone else. So what do we do then in that situation? I thought we had a really great show on that. That's actually a topic we could probably hit again, though.
Oh yeah,
you know?
There's so many in the intersection of, you know, human well-being and technology that is ripe for dissection.
Yeah.
So another one that I love, you know, wasn't too long ago, but was the
Am I the
Jerk?
Okay, there you go.
Am I the Jerk? Otherwise known as AITA. A Q&A session. We kind of like one of the things that Greg is well known for is like it's okay to make moral judgments, and you need to be able to back up those moral judgments. And so we kind of went through these questions of am I the jerk, and kind of walk through our reason making for making certain moral judgments based on real world experiences.
I think we should do another one of those. Maybe multiple ones. There's so many in the Reddit AITA forum that we'd never run out of them, and they really are great moral dilemmas. You know, there was another one that I particularly liked from a technical aspect as well as a content aspect, and that's the one that we just recently did with John Sellers. Although John Sellers wasn't on the air with us at the time, I did an interview with John Sellers, who's somebody really big in the philosophy as a way of life community. And then we took that and I played it. I played the clips of the interview on my phone while we were engaging in the radio show. And then, of course, I patched them in using our editor later on. And it was sort of like John was here, but not here. And so it gave us the capacity to bring in an expert guest. So I thought that was pretty cool that we could actually pull it off.
and that was us like listening to him live. So it was a really well done splicing in.
Yeah, and I think we could do more of those in the future, because, you know, we're not going to get people to want to record with us at 9 o'clock in the evening, especially if that translates to 3 a.m. there.
Yeah.
But I think we could bring in a lot more interesting guests like that, don't you?
Yeah, I think it's something to definitely pursue.
Yeah. Well, we were going to talk about some of the practices, but maybe we won't do that. We've got some other things that we wanted to talk about. We'll see if we have time to get to some of these practices. So another thing we were gonna hit on is where we thought we'd be at this time when we started the show. Mm-hmm. Obviously, COVID threw a huge monkey wrench into things.
Mm-hmm. Like personally, I didn't know. I was living pretty kind of like week to week at the moment. I didn't have a really regular job at the moment.
Yeah.
And everything has changed for me from my employment to running things within the communities that I run, and for relationships, it's like a whole different ballgame. I couldn't even say where I thought I was going to be because, and then you just throw in COVID, and that's just the entire world is in a place that would have been entirely alien to me.
You know, I think that originally we were planning on doing the show every week, Friday, during drive time, 4 to 5, and we'd made that commitment. And then, we got those 2 shows in, and then we had a downtime for a while. And then during the summer, we were able to do like a show a week. But then, you got a lot busier. I got a lot busier with the semester starting, and we started doing a new show like every other week most of the time. But we still managed to get 31 episodes done. And I think that's kind of a significant achievement. 31 good episodes. There's not a single one where I'd be like, well, that's just filler, or anything like that. We've explored a lot of really interesting and important topics, and a lot of them, of course, we can go back and there's more to say about them. But I think we did produce a lot of really quality content. And then, the shift, I was bringing in my camera and I would video record us in the studio, but I think doing this, and like you said, having the podcast as well, we've got some really stable content. This is going to be out there for decades to come. So it's kind of a cool legacy 1 year in. It isn't actually what I thought we'd be doing, quite frankly. I thought it was going to be more, there'd be, the recordings, but it'd just be more live, interacting, from 4 to 5 each week. And I'm actually kind of happy with the direction that things have taken.
Yeah. What do you think, if we go back to the studio, do you want to go back to the studio, or is this a more conducive workflow for you?
I do want to go back to the studio because I'm a pretty extroverted person, so I like getting out. I enjoy chatting with people, especially if we can get that 4 to 5 p.m. time slot back. That'd be pretty awesome because that's like prime driving hour.
I wonder if we could get 2 GoPros so we could still have like the double close up on the faces.
That would be really cool. Actually, that's something well worth thinking about. How to do the in studio stuff better,
Right.
That's something I haven't devoted any time any thought to at this point.
So speaking of surprises, like COVID was a big surprise. What were some of the biggest surprises that you've had in the past year doing this radio show?
So for me, I think it has to do with the videos of it. People really like to watch what to me seems to be pretty static content. It's you and me as heads, essentially, right? Or when we're in the studio, sitting in place, we gesticulate a lot, right? We're both hand talkers, but and I think we have adequate expressions on our face, but it's still not like very dramatic, is it? I mean, it's
No.
mostly you and me talking. People really like to watch that sort of stuff to the extent that, our first couple times that we tried doing this, the Zoom recording didn't work right. So there's kind of a gap in the video stuff. I think we're missing like episode 3, 4, and then maybe 5 and 6. And people will pester me about those.
Oh yeah.
Why are you holding back episode 3? I'm not holding it back. I just don't have
it. We stuck it with the Ark of the Covenant, and
exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of a surprise.
No one could see it.
To me.
If you are looking for those, they're on the podcast feed. You can go and listen to them.
Right. Yeah. You can hear them at least.
Yeah.
So what about you?
So
what was your big
for
surprise?
me is like doing this and then hearing back from other creators who I was enamored with, like I was a fan of their work, and hearing back that they had also listened to my work and said like they enjoyed it. So this was specifically Matt Vanetta, who is a podcaster and author, and I was moderating a what is it called?
Stoic on X.
Yes,
Yeah.
but specifically just a
Oh,
panel
it was
discussion.
a panel, right?
And
Yeah,
he was on the panel, and I was just doing my due diligence to make sure everyone was able to be presented as they would like to be presented, and started that conversation. So he gave me the compliment back. So it was nice to like, oh, I've produced something that someone else that I think is worthy of enjoying their work to have that reciprocity.
Yeah, that's pretty cool because he's a big heavy hitter in the Stoic podcast community. He had the Good Fortune podcast that that's been around for quite a while.
Yeah. 2017 maybe?
I think it goes back before that. It was something that turned a lot of people onto Stoicism.
Yeah, he's got a really nice way of presenting some really basic ideas in a really straightforward and easy to grasp way.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some topics that we would like to do in the future. A little bit of planning things out, and if you're a listener, and you are listening to this on the podcast or the video, you can always like shoot an email to us and say, hey, we want to see more of this or more of that, or you could also say
we
less
read the
something.
comments.
Exactly. So what are some of the things that you want to hit on that we haven't, or we might have delved into, but we didn't get into directly?
Yeah, so one of our next topics that we're going to get into is meaning. That's a big topic. That could probably be many episodes. And technology in the good life. How does our technology either help or hinder us? And what would be the criteria that we need to put on those things that are in our lives in order to determine if it is actually a benefit or a detriment to us?
Yeah, and how to turn things that maybe we recognize have been a detriment for a while, either if we're not going to get rid of them altogether, how to use them in ways that would be beneficial for us, right?
Right.
I'd like to do some more deep dive shows about philosophical practices. We did that one about negative visualization, and I think it would be cool. Actually, the circles of concern was also like a deeper dive one too. So I think it'd be nice to do more like that, where we devote a whole hour to one particular practice and really give a lot of examples about how to do it well.
Anything else?
I do a lot of work on anger management. Maybe we can shout at each other on the air a bit, I'm
so angry at you, Greg.
Yeah, I think it would be kind of cool to go into that. Maybe other emotions too. I think we did a show on anxiety, right? A while back. So maybe there's some others as well. Maybe
something beneficial, joy or zest.
Oh, right. That's actually a great idea because that came up in the Stoicon thing. So we're getting to the top of the hour. I think we probably have to cut it short at this point, right?
Unless there's the practice of like learning to trust your co-host, to like how to interact with them is something that's very useful. But thank you, Greg, for being my co-host.
Oh, thank you, and thanks for all the work that you've put in on this as well.
Thank you. So, we leave you with the words of J.R.R. Tolkien. The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone, and I must follow if I can. Pursue it with eager feet, until it joins some larger way, with many paths and errands meet, and whether then, I cannot say.